Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Route Consultant Weekly Webinar. For those of you who are here for the first time, my name is Josh Gregory. I am the director of our consulting and training teams here at Route Consultant. So I work across the board with new buyers getting into the space for the first time and contractors who are trying to find efficiencies and profitability in their business. So across the board, for everyone who's here every week, all of our regular attendees, welcome back. Again, we want this to be a place where you can all learn, ask questions, and hopefully have a little bit of fun. So we will make sure to do that every week. And before we get too far, before we get into the topic or anything today, just a quick disclaimer that I have to read as I do every week. So Route Consultant is not endorsed by and is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, is not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Now, as we do every week, the important thing is we're going to go through some topics. We're going to go through some content in just a second. At the end of the day, we will have a pure open Q&A session. And so if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them in as we're talking, and we'll get to it at the end. Now, if you are typing that question in, make sure that you put it in the Q&A box at the bottom of the window. If you put it in that chat button at the bottom, we will miss it. So make sure you put it in the Q&A button at the bottom, and we will get to those questions, answer them live, talk through all of them. So today, whether you are looking to invest in the FedEx space or you're currently operating there already, it's important to know what are the real threats affecting the industry. But also, what are the things that are overblown and speculated about that aren't really things you should be worried about? So today I have brought Jesse Smith on, and the two of us are going to talk through a variety of different topics here to help you think about how to prepare for the future of FedEx Ground. So Jesse, I will go ahead and kick it over to you first.
Thank you, sir. Good to be back with you guys on another webinar. So I'm going to take one of the more fun ones first here, Josh. So we're going to start with drones and driverless vehicles. So this one kind of pops up every now and then. And we see it, social media, we see the next new innovation in driverless cars. You know, Tesla's come out with the latest, whatever piece of technology. So this is something that I think we are going to see more and more rumors about as we go along. So let's talk about kind of where the current status of the drones and driverless vehicle market is right now. So now both of them, I'm just going to tell you straight up, I do not see these being a major threat anytime in the near future. So I'm just going to start right out of the gate. This is nothing that's going to threaten the last mile space in terms of what FedEx Ground, UPS, Amazon does. Now, with that said, I think we might see this creep into a little bit of the DoorDash type market, the Instacart, this very, very small local delivery orders. In fact, in some markets, we're already seeing that happen. There's a company called Zipline, in fact, that, you know, a lot of us worry about if a drone comes in and drops my sack of food off at my front door, what if the propellers hit the gutter or hit the wires and all that, right? Well, they came out with a really innovative idea where there's sort of like a master drone that's like, you know, 250 feet up, and it'll drop a line down with a miniature drone with your package of food and leave it right there on your doorstep. So it takes away all the concern about the propellers hitting wires or anything like that. So I do see that component of the, if you want to call that last mile space, that will potentially see some drone involvement. But by and large, think about what FedEx Ground specializes in. I mean, they're talking about boxes up to 150 pounds. If you look at most of the drones delivering your DoorDash orders, 8 pounds maximum, and most of the vehicles that carry them are going to be 150-mile range max. So if you're talking about ordering something, most of our orders, if you're, you know, whatever it is you're ordering, if it's coming from an Amazon warehouse in California and you live in North Carolina, that ain't coming by drone, right? So again, it might, at some point might go from the very last mile of the warehouse to your front door. But again, I just don't see that anytime soon replacing the current cost efficiency of having a driver in a big P1200 doing very dense residential type stops. There's just no way with the current technology to replace that model right now. So again, don't expect that anytime soon. I'm not saying it could never happen. I've learned to never say never, but at the same time, drones specifically is not something I'd worry about. The driverless vehicle thing. Now, this one, again, you're thinking about a driverless car, something that's going to the store and maybe getting a full order of groceries. Now, you're going to have a higher payload on this, right? You're going to have potentially 50, 60, maybe even 100 pounds of payload, maybe even more than that. but we're not talking about something that's going to be able to make the trip across the country or take a gigantic purple mattress that you ordered and get it to your front door. So we're talking smaller orders. Again, bigger payload than drones. It's not going to affect anything in terms of the last mile space. If you're looking at same day delivery, which Amazon has explored in some markets, things like that, crosstown deliveries from your CVS, Walgreens, things like that, there's a place for that. But the last mile delivery space, the FedEx, UPS, Amazon model, that's not going anywhere. So that's number one. I want to put any fears about that to rest. With the current technology, that is not going to be a threat right now. So putting that one to bed first, Josh. The next one I want to talk about.
Yeah, see, let me jump in one last.
Go ahead.
The other thing too, when it comes to driverless vehicles, FedEx is going to be one of the last to adopt it. The thing you always have to think about when it comes to those is, even if consumers start to adopt it, it's going to be a long time before FedEx feels comfortable putting any kind of, large scale vehicle on the road, because they don't want the liability that comes from that, because it just takes one accident in a driverless vehicle. Everyone will pay attention to it. It'll be all over the news. FedEx will get sued immediately for being the one to do it. So they're never going to be the first mover from driverless vehicles. They're probably not going to be the second or third mover either. So if it happens, it'll be because it has been widely adopted in almost every industry, and then FedEx decides to get into it. So just putting it exactly what Jesse said, it's going to be a while before that really starts to come and start to replace drivers at scale. Yeah,
exactly, Josh. So the next one I want to talk about is what's being called or looked at as the competition between FedEx Ground and FedEx Express in various markets. And honestly, I think that's really the wrong way to put this. I don't think we need to see it as a competition. It's more of, the mother corporation of FedEx is looking at what is the most profitable scenario, what's the best way to get the boxes to the front door, to meet customer needs. How are we going to do that the most profitable? And honestly, look at what's been the profit driver over the last decade or more, right? It's been ground. Now, there's been some profits internationally for FedEx Express, but in general, the thing that's been holding the company together the last decade or so has been FedEx Ground. I don't see, especially with the transitions that have already happened, we've seen Canada, we've seen Alaska and Hawaii go to Express. But look at what's happened in the lower 48. We've already seen Express buildings shuttered, and those drivers moved over into existing or new ground buildings that are what we call co-locations. So I don't see any danger of this being a competition. What could potentially happen, and we talked about this, if you want to go look at our previous webinars on this, we talked about this specifically, is that if there is a market that is very, very challenging to, let's say, hire drivers or keep a contractor, and so these very extended contingency situations where they're churning through 1, 2, 3 contractors a year, after several years, they're going to be looking at, look, the ground market here, this model is not working. So we're going to try to pull some different levers and see what we can make work. And honestly, I wouldn't even expect, even if a market does go express for a time, there's still going to be ground in the markets around that, right? So it's going to be little pockets of express where it might be 100% express taking on the ground volume in one little market. But if that doesn't work for a while, what's the other option? They could go back to ground. And the other thing I want people to think about is just a straight up numbers game in terms of actual volume. So I'm going to read some figures to you here. Ground carries 60% more volume daily than FedEx Express does. So in terms of the actual packages going through the network, that's not even talking about the size of the boxes. That's talking about just the number of boxes. So FedEx Ground on average runs about 9.9 million packages a day through their network. FedEx Express runs just north of about 6 million packages a day through their network. So think about it. If they're going to shutter one, which one's going to be less of a cost for them to shut down and migrate to the other? Well, obviously the one that's carrying more, has more capacity, is going to be the natural choice anyway. So I think if there's going to be a choice between, if all else is equal, ground is absolutely going to eat up more of that market share than Express will, except in your extreme contingency situations. So anything you want to add there, Josh?
I think that's all accurate. Yeah.
Okay. So the last one I'm going to talk about here is the big one that's been on everybody's mind lately is what the heck is going to happen to our drivers after this UPS deal got finalized? So if you've been living under a rock the past month, The Teamsters and the UPS leadership came to an agreement on a deal worth multiple billions of dollars that's going to make the highest earners, the most tenured drivers. Actually, they're saying the average, but who knows what's the real story of the average UPS driver out there. But the highest paid is sort of the average across the board. Here's where you top out is going to be around $170,000 annually, the total compensation package for your UPS drivers. Needless to say, that is at least twice, close to 3 times higher than what the average FedEx driver is making. If you break it down to the hourly rate, it's about double. So needless to say, that is causing contractors no small amount of concern over what's going to happen to my driver. So I do want to throw a few stats at you here and talk about sort of the ugly, and then we'll talk about the good and why this has got a serious silver lining. So after the deal was signed, Bloomberg is reporting that Indeed saw a 50% increase in the keyword UPS in the weeks following the deal, right? So people are looking to get these jobs. There's no doubt about that. When they opened up and said, here's the top, what you can earn, people are like, yeah, I absolutely want to sign up for that. So no surprise there. 100% more FedEx Ground drivers have updated their Indeed resumes since the deal. So whatever the number was, it has doubled since the deal went through. FedEx Ground drivers are looking to make the transition. Now, what we can probably say about that is that it's probably already leveled out, even in just a few short weeks. I'm guessing the labor supply and demand has already met its equilibrium. If not, it's getting darn close, just because of the number of people that have applied and have found out, oh, there's actually a whole heck of a lot of other people applying for this same position, right? So I would expect that we would already see, if you're applying for it now in the weeks going forward, it's probably already too late. Okay, that doesn't mean there won't be certain markets down the road that UPS is going to open up and say, yeah, we want drivers, right? But in general, if you look kind of across UPS's network, besides some hot spots where drivers were able to go in directly and start as drivers from another driving job, in general, UPS has still been requiring, just like they always have, you got to start in the warehouse and you got to work your way up into one of these driving positions. And then here's the other thing that I think a lot of FedEx drivers, they don't realize how easy they have it, right? Yes, they make less money. But let's be honest, some of these UPS drivers, they're working a grueling, long, tiring, hot job. And they're being required to work overtime. In fact, that's one of the tenets of the deal that was worked out, was they're being required to come in on their days off, right? They can't just have that extra time. They're being required to work overtime, even if they have scheduled time off. So the deal is going to change some of that. But what that also means is that, there's going to be even less market for people outside of UPS to come, because now if there were UPS drivers that didn't like the deal they were getting, not only are they going to be more likely to stay, but, because of the time off and stuff, but they're making way more money. So bottom line here is I see where the concern is, but I don't think, number one, the jobs are going to be available. And number two, and here's the silver lining I was talking about. If you do find a market where you can get on immediately as a driver without having to go through the warehouse, typically what's happening is you still have to have a 5-year track record of commercial driving history. Now think about it. If you're a new investor, you may not be aware of this, but most FedEx drivers do not stay on for 5 years. Okay, just statistically, we're looking in the 1 to 3 year category, sometimes longer, sometimes less, right? But in general, they're not always staying on for 5 years. So what you can do in your advertising here is potentially say, look, I understand this is not the top paying delivery job out there, but if you want your experience to go work at UPS eventually, here's a great roadmap to get there. Come work with me, and if you stay on 5 years, maybe I'll throw on a little bonus, right? A little end of term bonus, and you go be on your way, and we'll both, wave goodbye. It was mutually beneficial for both of us. And in that 5 years of time, hopefully I can find another person to take your seat when you leave. So again, it's not all great, but it's also not just the doomsday scenario that I think a lot of people are thinking about.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think a lot of FedEx drivers, just like you said, find out the high bar of expectation they walk into when they start digging a little bit more into what a UPS job entails. So I think you're right. There's always going to be that surge of, it's a big dollar figure. And so it's, your eyes get wide and you want to jump to the next, the greener pastures, but there is there are some thorns in that pastures, I would say, and that people find out pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I'll tack on one more thing about that. I mean, I just went into a terminal this morning, Josh, and I was just reminded that FedEx Ground drivers, when they get to set up their route, most of them have 100% autonomy in the way they want to set up that route and run it. You have the exact opposite of that at UPS. In fact, if a supervisor is going to come out, and actually heard about this years ago, a UPS driver buddy of mine, his supervisor was about to come audit his route. Literally what they do is the supervisor will come out there in the jump seat with their stopwatch, making sure they're getting up and back to the truck in a certain amount of time. FedEx is the opposite of that. Now, you do have to meet a certain number of stops per day, right? And we don't want you working 12 hours. But if you can do your job in a reasonable amount of time, that's good enough, right? And so that's a major shift that even if some drivers do go from FedEx to UPS, I have a feeling a lot of them will be coming back with their tails between their legs pretty quickly.
Yeah, I would agree there. Perfect. Okay, so next one that I'm going to talk about here is one of the ones that we hear about all the time, and that is whether or not they should be worried about Amazon and whether or not Amazon is a threat to the FedEx space. So just quickly, first of all, for those who don't know, Amazon does have a contractor model. It's pretty similar to FedEx's. There's several key differences. That's a whole webinar in and of itself. But we've got plenty of free content on that on our website. So if you're just looking for that, you can go find that. But just know that it is a contractor model and it is an ownership option for those of you looking to get into the logistics industry. But for today, the question is more about, is Amazon going to come in and take over the logistics industry and wipe out every other player? Now, I will be the first to say that I will never count Amazon out. They have the capital and resources to make a major play in just about any industry they want, but especially in the logistics industry. And they've already obviously had a huge impact on the delivery industry. But there are some really key reasons that it's going to take a long time before they're able to capture a lot of the enterprise shipping market. And when I say a long time, I'm talking about longer than 5 years. With the way this industry changes and evolves so quickly, it's really not worth worrying or making investment decisions about anything farther out than 5 years. So the first important note about Amazon is that FedEx does not deliver any Amazon volume. And that was a deliberate parting of ways that happened several years ago. So there's no threat of Amazon pulling their volume from the FedEx network because there isn't any. On the flip side, well, we've been talking about UPS. UPS is still really tied up to Amazon and still have about 10% of their revenue tied to Amazon deliveries. So they do have a real threat in their network. And those two companies are going to continue to figure that out together. They may stay how they are or separate from each other over the next few years. But regardless, that's not going to have an impact on FedEx. So that's the good news there. Now, the other side of it is that the real potential threat, if you've paid attention to the headlines recently, is that Amazon has announced a return to a service they demoed a couple of years ago, and they've relaunched called Amazon Shipping, in which they're actually going to take some volume or be open to volume outside of the Amazon.com ecosystem. So in theory, that sounds like a huge potential threat to FedEx. That is Amazon branching out potentially from just doing Amazon deliveries. But there are a few important reasons why it's not actually as bad as it sounds. The first is that lots of companies that are using FedEx or using UPS get volume-based discounts from those companies that are typically tied to contracts or experience with those companies that they will not want to lose by switching from Amazon. So a lot of times the larger shippers just have no interest and can't really switch to some new player that's entering the market. So most of those big ones aren't really going to make any changes there. The second is that actually right now, Amazon can't even reach the whole country. The Amazon shipping model will be using the US Postal Service to reach all of the country. So there's already challenges that come from that that's going to introduce some complexity. So we'll see how that rolls out. But even just that barrier there is they can't even ship to everyone. So that already rules out some shippers as well. And then probably the biggest fear from shippers is that Amazon's just going to get rid of the service if it doesn't get enough interest. Amazon is a big tech company. They move quickly, and they would be quick to pull the plug on a losing investment when they're doing really well just focusing on distributing and shipping everything that's a part of their ecosystem already. And also, like we just talked about, they ship a good deal of their volume through UPS. So they don't want to appear as combative or competitive with UPS when it's still a company that they depend on as a partner. So it would even take a few years for them to start to dissolve that partnership before they really even start to expand there. So for all those reasons and more, Amazon has real challenges before they're able to be a large scale competitor in the shipping space outside of that Amazon.com. That being said, I do still recommend working to see if you can find a way to diversify into Amazon if you're already a FedEx contractor. That way, regardless of how things shake out over the next 5 to 10 years, you get the advantage of, basically getting to dip into whichever company comes out on top. Because regardless, you want to be in as many different pies of the global e-commerce market as you can. And so with Amazon being a similar model, I've seen lots of contractors on the FedEx side diversify into Amazon or vice versa. Now, the last one that I want to touch on before we get to open Q&A is just how overarching economic factors are affecting the market. And the topic of concern for months now has been, will there or won't there be a recession? And so, back in July of last year, there was a recession expected by the fall of last year. Then it was moved to December of last year. Then in February, they predicted it by the end of this year. Now, a lot of the talk is that there is a higher and higher chance that we're going to have a soft landing, which basically just means we've had a slowdown, but it's not a true recession. So not as dire as it originally appeared. And one of the big things we've seen there is that GDP growth has remained above 2%. And there's even some recent reports showing a GDP growth estimate of 5.8% from July to September. So obviously, I'm not here standing on this webinar as an economist. I don't have a crystal ball. But the good news is that the chances do appear to be falling that there will be any true recession. Now, on the other side of it, there has been, some challenges that have come from inflation for investors, particularly when it comes to lending. And I would not expect the Fed to cut rates again until at least sometime next year, so that they continue to stay on top of this inflation trend. So we're going to continue to see high interest rates. So that makes loans more expensive, and it does make banks tighter on what businesses they'll lend on and the multiple that they'll support for that investment. Now, the good news there is we should be at or near the peak for interest rates. So those of you who are getting variable rate loans now will be able to benefit from those rates decreasing in the future. But more than ever, it is crucial to be working with a lender that knows the FedEx space and has funded these deals before to have the highest chance of closing one of these loans. And so if you need any introductions there, we have plenty of banks we can introduce you to, whether you're thinking SBA or conventional. We just want to make sure that you're on the right lending path there. And again, have the highest chance of success. And then the other side of the market equation is that e-commerce is still a thriving and growing part of the economy. The US consumer continues to spend on e-commerce and to spend more than expected. We continue to see an increase quarter after quarter there. And that volume will flow through to the last mile network, to contractors, especially as we see things we've talked about already, like the FedEx Express integration, continue to bring additional volume into the ground network. So again, I can't tell you exactly where the market or the economy will be a year from now, but I can tell you that 3 to 5 years from now, e-commerce will continue to grow and be significantly healthier. And there are very few industries that exist that offer that kind of potential with this few barriers to entry. So those are the main threats we wanted to talk about today, rumors, things to address to kind of help hopefully clarify some of those for you. So we have a couple of quick things to go through before Q&A. So as I'm going through these, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and pop it in the Q&A box at the bottom. And then we will get to that in just a second when we open it up for Q&A. So just quickly, wanted to go over the new listings for the week. We've had 2 new listings. The first is a P&D listing out of South Carolina. It's 11 P&D routes at 1.25 million. It's really high margin, 22%. It's got a manager, 15 trucks with 4 spares. And so this is also one that's launching an AVP program, the Alternative Vehicle Program. So if you are looking for something like that, something a little bit more creative as well, especially as you're thinking about Express, AVP has a lot of value propositions there. But again, if you're in the South Carolina area, you have questions about that, reach out to our team. Second one is a line haul listing out of Tennessee, 5 line haul runs. It's got 2 managers as well. So 5 trucks that are all newer. And again, 2 managers are going to make standing up on this type of line haul operation significantly easier. So again, 5 line haul runs for $450,000 out of Tennessee. Now, just a few upcoming events. The first is we have our Dallas Roadshow next week, September 14th. And this is a peak season prep roadshow where we're gathering together to help think through and talk through everything you need to be doing right now to prepare for peak season. So that's in Dallas, and that's next week. We also have a new investor summit at the end of this month on September 25th and 26th. So if you never heard of it, these summits are designed to teach you as much as we possibly can in 2 days, cram it in to help you make the decision on whether or not FedEx is the right industry for you. And so if you're going to enter the space, I want you to do so confidently and with a really solid understanding of the industry. And that's what these summits are designed to do, is in as much detail as possible as we can in 48 hours. And so that one's at the end of September. Next one, we have a happy hour in Phoenix on October 18th. So if you're in the Phoenix area, we'll be out there coming to the West Coast soon. And then the last one that it's never too early for, the expo is the expo next year in Dallas is live. You can go ahead and reserve your rooms and register for the event. It is free to register. So you can go ahead and make sure that you lock in those rates for next year. Okay, so those are all the upcoming events. So now I want to get over to the Q&A. So let's see, I've seen a bunch of questions coming in. A quick, easy one here from Neil. Basically, is there an equivalent of Kelly Blue Book for step vans and tractors? One that I've used a lot. Obviously, we have our own valuation methods, things like that we use. But if you're just looking for a website, truckpaper.com is a really easy one that you can go in and just kind of compare current rates. So that's kind of the simple one I'd point you to, truckpaper.com. All right, let me look at the rest of these. Now, let me see. Okay, let's do this one from Mike here. So looking at routes for sale, and he wants to, he's heard about the things that happened to Spencer with FedEx, and he heard about the Express things, and wants to just kind of understand how that'll affect contractors. So as far as Express goes, that kind of integration, Jesse talked about it just a second ago, but the real thing is, for the vast majority of territories in the lower 48, we are expecting Ground to bring Express into their network. And like Jesse, for all the reasons Jesse talked about, Ground is bigger. It is significantly more difficult to add, all of those Ground size packages to the FedEx Express network with those small vehicles and drivers used to moving envelopes, as opposed to the other side where in the US, the Ground network is larger. We've got more capacity to take those and bring that into the Ground network. So that's what we're expecting kind of across the board there. As far as what happened to Spencer, you really don't need to worry about that unless you plan on going on a public stage and publicly calling out a company like FedEx. That was a very unique situation that will not affect anyone else unless you plan on taking the stage in that manner. And it was I was obviously something we were prepared to do, but that should not be a worry for you and any potential threat to your contract is what I would say there. All right. Now, this is another one on Express and Ground. When do we expect the merge to be fully executed? I don't know if you have anything to say there, Jesse.
Well, the initial target that they had given was going to be June of next year. And we've heard from various contacts throughout the country that either in some places, they don't expect any integration, or they expect it won't be done until 2028 or later. So it's really going to come down to again, like I said, what's the best lever they can pull for that particular market? And so when they say full integration, that means that the markets in which they want to integrate the two together. And that will be 2028 or later, I would say, is probably going to be the earliest. Now, they're going to keep doing it in waves. We've seen a couple waves so far, but in general, I wouldn't expect full integration anytime in the next few years.
Yeah, and I would say as a model for that, if you're looking for previous examples from FedEx, overlap happened, 5-6 years ago, in where they combined the home and ground networks, where there were previously some contractors only doing business delivery, some only doing residential, but in the same zip code. So kind of similar to the way FedEx Express and Ground look now, and they overlapped those contractors. And for most contractors, that happened probably the first year or two after they kind of said they were going to do it. But there are still some pockets of the country that have not finished overlap. They're very rare. There's only a couple left, but that just kind of shows, anytime that there's a lot of, facilities that have to be combined and logistics that have to be figured out, FedEx will do it in waves, and they'll figure it out as they go. But it's probably going to take them a little while to actually fully finish. They'll probably get a significant portion of it done in the first year or two. And then, the kind of trouble pockets they'll be figuring out for a while. All right. Here's one from Brian. What's a typical down payment that banks require before making either an SBA loan or conventional loan? This is a long answer, but I won't go all the way into it. What I'll tell you is SBA, you can go as low as 10%. Conventional is usually going to want 20 to 25%, probably 25% as a down payment. It can vary though. Typically, to go as low as 10% for the SBA, they're also going to want the seller to bring 10%, to do 10% seller financing as well. So that's usually the mark to go for, is if you can get at least 10% of an SBA loan. That being said, like I was talking about earlier, current environment, interest rates are higher. Banks are just, to have the higher chance of actually securing one of these loans, the more you can bring to the table, the better, obviously. Also, the more seller financing you can get the seller to do, the better and the higher the chance that the loan will be secured. So really though, 10% on the low end for SBA, 25% for conventional, but there are other answers and conversations there, but that's kind of the high level one I'll stop with. Okay, so this is one that I don't have an answer to. I'll just talk about briefly because it's a complex calculation, but basically he said, do you know what the average cost per hour that FedEx pays to contractors? That's what he's trying to understand, that based on the number of hours, the drive time, to compare that to the UPS new driver rates. So you definitely can't, it would be almost impossible to compare the contractor per hour rates based on the way FedEx pays contractors. You could compare the driver rates, the rates that drivers are being paid by FedEx versus UPS. And like Jesse talked about, it's, about double if we're just talking hourly rates in terms of what UPS drivers can sometimes expect over FedEx. But FedEx doesn't pay any kind of hourly expense. That's when they're paying contractors. So that's the reason it's really hard to quantify it in hours. There's a variety of different ways they pay: the weekly flat service charge, a per stop, per package pays, and a few other little ones. But it is difficult to try to figure that out in terms of, that type of compensation comparison. All right, here's another one from Andy. So he's saying, he's seeing contracts where, in the past they'd always gone up with FedEx, but this year he hasn't seen it increase on his contract this year. Do we see that changing? If yes, when? I would say that I have seen contracts that are flat to increasing this year. I think the thing to take into account is actually looking at how those PCATs are calculated. So if you haven't gone into the numbers of previous year versus this year, even if the bottom line revenue can look lower, the actual rates can end up being something that would have been better than your previous contract. So some of it is calculation, but the challenge that FedEx is only recently changing in terms of how those PCATs look, how those contracts looks. Last year and even the beginning of this year, a lot of FedEx's growth projections for volume were negative, but now they're starting to trend back to being neutral to positive. And so it's not everywhere that I've seen them be positive, but most of them are pretty close this year that I've looked at. Last year, I think, which was, last year was the year that we came out and we had a lot to say about the way contracts were calculated. I saw a lot more negative contracts than I've seen this year. Most of the contracts I've seen this year have been either flat or starting to increase again. So that is, even if the specific one you're talking about may not have been positive this year, I would say that the general trend I've seen when I've compared a lot of these contracts is flat to increasing again as we're starting to head into this year and the back end of this year and into next year. All right, let me see. Let's see what you say on this one, Jesse. What would stop FedEx or Express from absorbing Ground after the Express stations have been closed and the contractors have implemented the merge? Basically, the Ground drivers and contractors did the merge, and then right after that, FedEx just tried to completely take it over. And have Express do it completely?
Well, I'll just kind of start with one of the main reasons that they have gone the other way and kind of let you go from there. But I'll just go I always bring things back to DRO, Josh, and I'll just take that one. We'll just start there. Just from a base level operations perspective, it is so much easier and takes so much less overhead for FedEx Ground to let their contractors, and this would apply whether it's Express or Ground, FedEx corporate, right? Whether they run it with their overhead back office crew or letting a contractor figure stuff out. There are so many little variables that it's just so much easier. And honestly, a lot of them are better for the contractors to have control of themselves. DRO is a perfect example of that. The dynamic route optimization, how you set your routes up each night based on the volume forecast you see for the next day. FedEx has already, in some contracts, we talked about those a couple of weeks ago in the service capacity agreements, FedEx has retaken the reins on some of these issues and seeing DRO and running and setting the stops or the routes up for themselves. And they're seeing, wow, there's actually some issues here that contractors are doing a whole lot better solving for themselves versus us doing it. And so just from what I always say is look at the people who have the most to gain or lose from that last mile optimization and any features related to that, which DRO is right at the heart of that, right? So if the contractor's in control of which package goes on which truck, FedEx doesn't want that back. They really don't. They want, again, it's a win-win if contractors can do it right. And guess what? If you need help with that, come talk to me because I'd love to help you do that better, right? But the point is, contractors, in my opinion, do it much better than FedEx Ground could. And I think FedEx probably knows that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to think about there is, so think about it this way. Think about the move that happens. If FedEx decides they're dissolving Express in an area, that means they've got, these smaller trucks, they've got some drivers that they're going to move over and basically eliminate that cost of those drivers. They're going to eliminate the cost of running that fleet and hand it over to Ground, which is much cheaper for them to do, like Jesse said. On the flip side, if they're trying to bring Ground in, that means they have to buy all of those vehicles and basically replace a fleet across the country. Because the thing about the trucks in the Ground network versus Express, they're much bigger. So you can't just immediately convert your Express vehicles to handling Ground volume. Also, a lot of Express drivers have a much easier day than what Ground drivers do and are used to small packages that do not take any physical acumen to deliver those packages. So we're even seeing it already where some of those Express drivers who have lost their jobs and are looking to come into the Ground network have much higher expectations as opposed to the reality of what they're capable of and kind of valued at. And so trying to bring those Ground vehicles into the Express network would be extremely expensive. And then if they brought those Ground drivers in, that means they're also probably going to have to pay them and have different rates. You think about it with the requirements FedEx has to have when they're actually employing people, the types of benefits they're required by law to offer, as opposed to what contractors do when they're less than 50 employees, there's different requirements on what they have to offer employees. Just that benefit package alone is expensive for FedEx. So there's all kinds of reasons that make it really difficult to bring Ground into the Express network across the board. So if there's a scenario where they've co-located and they've said we're bringing Ground in, I would not expect that after that point they're going to flip a switch and immediately try to replace everything. It's just really time consuming and expensive for FedEx. All right, here's one from Pamela. Is it better to pay drivers hourly or daily rate? What are your thoughts on that, Jesse?
Yeah, pros and cons to both. So the benefits of the flat daily rate, which is the industry standard for the vast majority of contractors, is that it, by its very nature, it incentivizes efficiency. And so if you're wanting a driver to go out there and deliver at a fast pace, then you pay them a flat daily wage because they're getting the same amount, whether they get done at 1 o'clock versus 6 o'clock, right? So it automatically incentivizes productivity, efficiency, the things that you want to see. But the other benefit of that is that it makes it into a fixed expense on your balance sheet. And that's what a lot of contractors, there's so many variable expenses that they have to sort through. The more things they can make a fixed item on their sheet, that's going to simplify their payroll and their lives so much more. Now, the thing about hourly is it's not bad necessarily. In fact, if you have drivers that drive vehicles under 10,000 pounds gross vehicle weight, you have to pay them an hour. You have to at least show that you're paying them an hourly wage and pay them overtime if they go over 40 hours a week. You have to do that anyway. With that, now you could potentially have somebody that, if you have most, like I know some terminals up in the Northeast do this, where all the contractors in the building, it's a standard to already pay hourly. So then if you introduce your contract, you want to go in and buy a contract there and you're going to start paying flat daily. Well, drivers realize they're not going to be able to sort of milk the clock anymore, right? And so that might be a liability. But in general, that's not really an issue with most people coming in. And so if you're going to go into it, most of the markets out there, you can just start at a flat daily wage, fixed daily rate, whatever you want to call it. In my opinion, that incentivizes more of the things that you want to see. And then the last thing I'll say on that, it's easier to tack on a productivity or efficiency bonus on the top of that flat daily wage that's tied to productivity. So what we call a stop threshold bonus. It's a little bit easier to throw that on top of a flat daily rate than an hourly wage. And so, so for those reasons, I think it's a lot easier to pay the fixed daily rate.
Yeah. And the hourly is cleaner. You do it right, it fits the audit no matter what. And there are states you have to do it, so there's that too. But yeah, that across the board in the situations that you can, we've generally found daily rates to be better. But there's definitely exceptions, reasons why you can't always do daily rates. So, all right. Now, here's one from Neil. So I think it kind of comes back to everything that we talked about today. So of the concerns discussed today, as well as those may be not discussed, what do you deem to be the single greatest risks to the FedEx contractor model? And so I'll answer. If you have anything different, you can add it after. But personally, I feel it's one we didn't talk about, which is FedEx itself. I think the biggest threat is FedEx not kind of keeping up with things and their executives making the wrong decisions to not, kind of move with the times and make sure that contractors continue to be compensated properly and they continue to get the right message across to their contractor base. I've seen a lot of pros this year in terms of some moves that FedEx has made in that right direction there. They've started to actually have communication with their contractor base, have some dialogue there, have events where they bring people out and try to listen to feedback. And I think that's the path that they need to stay on for them to continue to be successful, to make sure that the contractors are heard and that the model is adapting to fit market trends. I think that would have, has the highest chance of leading to problems in the space as opposed to something external. I think it's something that they need to focus on internally and continue to keep that focus and not say, hey, we looked at it this year and we did that check. So that was 2023. We'll change for next year. But they need to continue to make that feedback and those kinds of conversations a part of their DNA if they want to stay on top.
And I'm going to throw it the other way, Josh. I agree. That is definitely the big one. That's the one that's the most significant threat. But I'm going to throw it back to if there's any new investors. And I know there are a lot of you here in this webinar. I'd say one of the biggest threats would be you coming into this space uneducated, because at the end of the day, you can't control what FedEx Ground does. You can control what you do. And that's why I love what I do here at Route Consultant is I get to work with you all and see you guys go out there and win day in and day out. That's why I believe in this company. And again, hopefully I can shamelessly sell some consulting here, Josh. But again, I'm serious. I see a lot of contractors that are sort of holdovers from the old days, the RPS days. And I'd say a good half of them, if not maybe more, are they struggle with all these new changes, because let's face it, the logistics industry is not friendly. If you are risk averse, this is not the place to be. And so if you're trying to get into this business and thinking it's mailbox money and just want to get in and just have generational wealth with no input from you, that would be a grave mistake. And so I want to see you all get into this with the right education, knowing what you're doing, having the mindset of, I'm going to come in and be a solution here and not just hope that I can take whatever I get from FedEx's hand and then just, chew them out later and talking with people on Facebook or whatever, right? And there's always going to be a place where FedEx is doing something wrong. We can always find something. But I just want to encourage everybody here, if you're coming into this, get educated, be a solution. Don't come in and just expect it's going to be easy money and then FedEx is going to make all the changes and with no expectation of a challenge on your part.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the entrepreneur spirit of being gritty and making it work regardless. And you'll see that across the board from contractors in the network. But Jesse's right that, if that standard isn't continued to being maintained and you aren't ready to roll with whatever sandbox FedEx puts you in, you got to just optimize what you're given. And so that's a great call out. And he's right. That's why we do what we do, is we want to make sure that when you enter this space, hopefully you're as educated as you can be. And because FedEx doesn't hold your hand, so we'll try to hold it for as long as we can, and then, build you up and help get you ready to run as soon as you take over the business. I'll just do a quick one here before we go. So one here is, how have multiples changed? What are your thoughts on whether those will be going up or down moving forwards? They've been pretty constant for a while now, even as net operating incomes may adjust year over year. The multiples that these trend at are generally pretty constant. They're a little bit lower this year than I would say about 2 years ago, as we were in the heat of COVID. Right now, they're in kind of the 4 to 4.5 range is basically where most of them fall. But at the end of the day, it's always going to be a function of net operating income. And as the businesses continue, as things stabilize in the economy and as, Express and things like that roll into the network, I would expect those multiples to start to trend upwards again in the near future. And then the last one here, this may have been asked earlier, is Amazon a better choice than FedEx? I think there are huge pros and cons to each. And I think it is, we have tons of content on our website that's free. You can go into all of this if you just go to our site and go to the learn section or type Amazon. We've got a bunch of different videos and articles about it. But in general, I'd say Amazon's basically a few years behind the FedEx space in terms of, certain things they're doing with their operating model. So the business in terms of the multiples that they sell at, the kind of the equity value of them is a little bit lower because banks aren't as sure on this type of business. Amazon hasn't existed for as long. And so your equity doesn't build as fast as compared to FedEx. FedEx is more stable, but there's a lot about Amazon that's really nice from a cash flow perspective. There's a lot of things that, Amazon's basically going to hold you hostage on. They are in charge. They make all the decisions. There's no DRO with Amazon. Amazon tells you how many routes you're running. They provide the vehicles. There's a lot of things like that they are very overbearing on and make all the rules and all the changes. And so that can feel a little bit more scary. But if you're hitting the right marks, Amazon is really nice from a cash flow perspective. So the combination of the two, it's why I point to diversifying cash flow from Amazon. And then you've got the equity building faster with FedEx. Not that you don't get good cash flow from FedEx, but the combination of the two can be really great. It's why a lot of people use both. But there are pros and cons to each. It's harder to get into Amazon right now. So there's things like that too, where even if you want to be in Amazon, it might take a lot longer. So maybe you go FedEx and then diversify into Amazon once you kind of got your feet underneath you. But there's economies of scale that come from both, all kinds of reasons. But it's a hard answer to give as just a flat which one's better. I wouldn't say that there's an easy answer there. And then I think this is just a quick clarifying question. How does your multiple of earnings take into account trucks or in trucks investment required? What we're looking at is the price to run the business. And so if there are trucks needed beyond what's included in the business, we will increase the value, the expense line item for the repair and maintenance and rental line item, essentially saying, this is going to be the cost of running rentals until you have enough trucks. So if the seller is able to say, here's additional vehicles to offset that, so you do have enough vehicles now, it would offset it. But we are saying a 4 times over net operating income is the multiple that we're showing. And so it is inclusive of the vehicles. It is inclusive of the operating expense to run the vehicles. If the fleet is short, we add rental expense to that line item. But other than that, that is all we have time for today. So we didn't get to all the questions. If you have any that didn't get answered, send it to info@routeconsultant.com and we will make sure to address it. Make sure if you have a consultant, anyone you're working with, they can go into depth on all of those. Now, again, a lot of events, a lot of new listings. If you have questions on any of those, or if you want to attend any of the events, they are in the chat. So any of those links to register are there in the chat right now before you go. And they're also on our site if you go to the events part of our calendar. And so other than that, again, Jesse, thank you so much for coming out today, talking through it. And for everybody else, thanks for joining. We will see you next week.
Bye, everyone.